Yes, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Leitner? Here. Commissioner Lechka? Commissioner Rice? Here. Commissioner Duckham? Commissioner Alexander? There she is. Commissioner Mahoney? Commissioner Palachek? Here. Commissioner Elwell? Here. Chairman Shotwell? Here. 8 present.
Any public comment?
Good morning. We have the first on the agenda is the proposed calendar for 2015, and I believe we shared one calendar with you the last time we met. We were asked by several commissioners to propose an alternate calendar for consideration. So the calendar that's in the board docs shows 2 different scenarios. The one in the blue boxes is what it would be if we maintain the system of reporting that we have now, the Friday, Monday, and then a week from the Tuesday after that Monday. The ones in orange is an alternate one where we did a Monday, and then a week later Monday, and then a week later Tuesday. So it provides some separation between the committee meetings and the work session. So those are the 2 alternate schedules that we came up with, and sharing those at your request.
Speak first. Commissioners have approached me with the fact of timeliness with all the committee assignments that they have to being able to become fully versed in issues that we have going on in the county, and a spacing of additional days between study session and committee session they feel would be very, very helpful. That's the reason why we've put together this draft. I was hoping we could get some consensus and maybe the possible new members would be here, but they're not here today, so I think the 8 of us can sort this out and have it ready to go in January. I myself am ambivalent about a new schedule. I can work with either one that's presented here without any real problem. I do like the fact, though, of the spacing. It does make it a little easier when we're trying to learn stuff about new projects or issues that are constantly evolving. I guess number 1 would be the street naming ordinance. We've all known about this and have been talking about it for 6 months, but it really has come to the public here in the last month. And the extra 7 days has helped staff an extra month to get things kind of organized. That's my feelings on it. I'd like to hear from all of us. Commissioners? Commissioner Elwell.
My only complaint would be on the eating up a second Monday. My line of work, Mondays at the office are always hectic. There's just a bunch going on. And, of course, I eat up one Monday, as in standing committee days that we'll have this coming Monday, which is a trip here for a meeting in the morning first, into work, back out for another meeting, and then back into work again. And I mean, Monday, it's just a personal thing for me. Monday could probably work, but just it's bad timing first thing on a Monday morning at a police department to be away from there. Is there some reason that later in the day couldn't work, or that Tuesday couldn't work? Is there something critical about the Monday or not?
I do like this new proposed calendar. The only issue that I have is I do serve on one board, South Central Michigan Works, that typically meet on Mondays, and I don't know how it would conflict with that, but I'd have to go back and look at their calendar for 2015.
This isn't going to affect me, but I think the extra week between meetings is excellent. I know sometimes we've come from a study session, then Monday we got to act on it, and we scramble around, and sometimes you can't get any information over the weekend. So I think this, and Tuesday, on 3 successive Tuesdays, I don't see would be bad either if whatever works out for the crew next year. But I can see where this could be much more informative. or people could get much more informed from this calendar.
I think Commissioner Duckham and then Commissioner Rice.
I'm kind of, I like it just the way it is. It works really well for me. And that way, when we are in discussion at the Board of Commission meeting on a Tuesday night, it's fresh in your mind because we've discussed it on Friday and probably had conversations about topics and issues over the weekend as well as, like I say, Friday. So it's fresh on everybody's mind when we get to the Board of Commission meeting Tuesday night. So I like it just the way it is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For myself, I certainly would like to see it be stretched out to roughly that week period, because obviously I like doing my homework and asking questions. So now, whether or not it's a Monday or a Tuesday, if a Tuesday would be better for like Commissioner Elwell, for instance, or something, I have no problem with that either. But I just think we should stretch it out to have time to ask questions and do our research.
We'll have staff put together the Tuesday possibility and have them look at theirs and see if it works, and if it does, maybe we'll be here at Tuesday 8 a.m. next year. Mr. Alexander.
I definitely am in support of modifying the schedule. It does not give us adequate amount of time that work within the business day. I'm more than happy to spend my Thursday evening preparing for today's meeting or this weekend to prepare for Monday's meeting. That's not the issue. The issue is the amount of time we have that are within the business hours in which people are allowed to get back with us, are in a working schedule. That is my biggest concern there. So I'm definitely in support of modifying it. I would ask as we move forward, we also consider moving all beginning times to 8 a.m. or at the earliest, moving the study session to 8 a.m. to accommodate those that are traveling great distance for presentations, which we quite often have for study sessions, and it is officially the business beginning day of the workday for those who are employees coming to present. Also, I would ask that when we move forward, if by chance standing committee meets on the second Monday of the month, if that is to stay in place, that we modify the human services time from 10 o'clock to a different time. There is a state level meeting in which our health officer is invited to participate in that would be very beneficial for him to participate in, and because of our standing committee at that 10 o'clock time for human services, he is unable to participate. So I think for the betterment of the entire county and his more preparedness and information he can gather, that would be a benefit as well. Thank you.
Well, with that, we'll propose or put together another alternate schedule and bring it before you. The time to adopt this would be at your organizational meeting on I believe it's January 2nd this year. So we'll have all those options available to you to make a decision on. The next item we have is the stop loss coverage. This is something as you know, our health benefits advisor is constantly looking out for different services that we can save money on. So Joni Johnson, the Deputy Human Resources Director, can explain what the proposal is here.
Good morning. Each year McGraw-Wentworth does shop out our stop loss coverage. They do a couple of different things. They do an analysis to determine if our current stop loss level based on history of usually the past 5 or 6 years is still adequate, and then just to make sure that we're getting the right bang for our buck, so to speak, as far as the premium. So when they did that this year, they actually did find that Sun Life of Canada is a better alternative to Blue Cross Blue Shield, which historically has tended to be the better choice. This year we would be changing, based on McGraw's analysis, from a $100,000 deductible to a $125,000 deductible. And for the first time we would be including not only medical claims but prescription claims, as prescription have gone over the years, there are more and more very expensive prescriptions that are being given to individuals, especially those with serious health conditions, which are the ones that trigger the stop loss. So they advise that it's really in our best interest to include both medical claims and prescription claims under the stop loss going forward for 2015. And as the document shows, moving to Sun Life, we would realize a savings in premium next year of $96,152.
Joni, do we know of any other local entities, communities, municipalities that are using Sun Life?
I don't personally know. We could certainly try to find that out.
That's obviously my first question.
I believe Mr. Wentworth, though, or
Surma?
Mr. Surma, is familiar with the company, though.
Yes.
And so it's not a cold call, so to speak.
Yeah. They are always extremely thorough and would never recommend any company if they had any qualms about them whatsoever.
Do you feel confidence that due diligence has been
Oh,
performed
yes.
and that
Yes. Mm-hmm.
they're adequately vetted?
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course, this is a calculated risk because we are self-insured. There's always a risk, but it's also mitigated. The stop loss is we're self-insured up to that stop loss. So if we have more people hit that stop loss, at $25,000, you'd have to have 5 more people hit that, or 4 more people hit that stop loss before it became negative. But like Joni said, McGraw-Wentworth, our advisor, they make they do their due diligence, and they make calculated decisions about where we should go with our benefits. So we feel comfortable with it.
And they typically shop this out every year, so if we find at the end of the year of 2015 that maybe we've either had some issue or Blue Cross going into 2016 is again more affordable, then they would welcome us back. So
This is for all employees with health insurance, both retirees and actives?
yes.
Thank you.
Well, with the exception of the post-65, because that's a fully insured product, so.
Carl? Go ahead.
Do we know how many people have reached a stop loss in the last calendar year?
You know, I haven't looked at the numbers recently. I think it was a little higher this year, but I don't know that number off the top of my head. It's usually not a very large number. You know, I think maybe if we had between 5 and 10, that would probably be a kind of a normal year. But I honestly haven't recently looked at the numbers to give you a good guesstimate, I guess. It's a very small percentage.
Carl?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this may actually be for possibly the administrator here. Obviously, in the past, when we have had discussion and even made some changes when it comes to health care, it seems to me like the post-65 retirees, from what I'm hearing, have been generally satisfied with what they have. But obviously, we have pre-65 retirees and that aren't necessarily happy, and obviously we have current employees. You know, we hear that the administrator, deputy administrator, says we're happy with this. Does that include employees that have had a chance to look at this, whether they be current or pre-post employees? Have they had a chance to kind of take a quick look at this to see what their thoughts are? Because we all know that at the end of the day, somebody in that group's going to take a look at it, and I'd like to at least know, maybe beforehand, if what their perspective is on this change. I just think it's very important that we get ahead of the game because this involves people's lives, and let's face it, in the past, well, some people have been caught off guard, and I know there's been discussion on why and so on and so forth, but I just wonder if that might not be prudent to do that.
Don't get this confused with insurance coverage. This is to protect the county. It does not affect any of the insurance plans. This is basically, because we're self-insured, a stop limit that we stop paying claim for claim. The employees will absolutely, and the retirees, it doesn't affect them at all as far as what they pay, what their plan is. Instead of the county paying up to $100,000 for a claim, and then it becomes a fully insured claim after that, we will be paying up to $125,000, and then it's fully insured beyond that. And because of the analysis of where our stop loss should be, because if we go with a $100,000 stop loss versus a $125,000 stop loss, the premium is higher. McGraw does an analysis to see which one makes more financial sense for us, which does it make more sense to pay a little more in the stop loss going up to the 125 as to paying a higher premium for having it set at 100. But it doesn't affect anybody's insurance plan. It's really, the employee would have no clue if they had a large claim. It's not affecting what they pay now at all.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. So it doesn't affect their pocketbook at all?
No, it affects the county's pocketbook,
I understand that part,
Yeah.
okay. Okay,
but
thank
not
you.
the employer, the retiree.
Andre, thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah.
So if I hear you correct in what the deputy administrator said, as soon as we hit the fourth person a year that hits the stop loss, we've lost any savings. In the fifth one, we're now...
No,
Well, the savings is $96,000
in premium,
premium.
over having it with Blue Cross for what they have proposed for 2015.
For a $100,000 stop loss.
For 100, well, Blue Cross actually put a quote in for 120 stop loss
All right.
versus 125. But by moving to Sun Life, because the premium isn't necessary, it is based on our history. I mean, I think it's a 7-year history that's been given to Sun Life for them to develop their quote to see the history of stop loss. But there isn't necessarily a magic number where now we're going to have to pay more. It could affect a renewal rate in 2016 from Sun Life if we had more than the average individuals reach the stop loss potentially, because they're always looking, at your claims history.
Thank you.
Where you were going with that is correct, though. But as Joni said, if we average on 5 to 10, that would be a 40% or higher increase, which statistically is an unlikely possibility. But so, like I said, it is a calculated risk.
It's just that I didn't see anywhere here where it said that Blue Cross was quoting at 120 instead of at 1.
In the staff report.
That was information that was given to us from McGraw.
Okay.
So basically, where they're going with Blue Cross, with 120 stop loss, or Sun
Life.
Life with 125,000 stop loss. We're just picking between two carriers, and we can save, by going the extra $5,000 on the stop loss, we can save $96,000 on the premiums.
Yes.
Unless we have a very abnormal year.
Well, that premium amount is set for the year. It is set for 2015.
Okay.
Where they would make any change would be going forward into 16.
Thank you.
Is this a 1-year?
Yes,
Contract, okay.
yes. We typically just do 1-year agreements on stop loss, yes.
Okay, well, this will be in the committee meeting packet for Monday, and then on to the full board on Tuesday, or at the Tuesday meeting this month. So, thank you, Joni.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the street naming and addressing ordinance. And Mr. Ames from the GIS department will give a brief summary of what's happened on that.
In your packets, you had a newer version of the ordinance that hasn't been to the committee yet. They're due to meet Tuesday to review these changes. These changes came about with a discussion with Mr. Overton on Monday that to be included, to be discussed, to be included, and bring it forward to you. With the comments and suggestions that are concerns that were being made by some of the communities, this was an attempt to hopefully come to, what do I want to say, to allow everybody to have a win and a compromise in the ordinance, because the ordinance is still the ordinance. You've had an ordinance since 2006. It was revised in 2009, and it still exists. This is basically the same ordinance with the two major things in the ordinance that you saw before was that the county would do the addressing itself, and then the street naming committee would take over the ability to initiate changes. The ordinance that you received in your packet on page 2, section 1C, has a new paragraph added to it that would allow a village or township to accept responsibility and liability for the administration of section 6. Section 6 of the ordinance is the part dealing with changes of addresses and street names. By resolution submitted to the county, they would have the ability to take over the administration and liability of that section in this ordinance right now. And that's where most of the concerns come from. The county would still do the addressing countywide, issue new addresses. And that's the biggest change. And then also there were some examples. The administrator would like some examples put into the ordinance. There's more that'll go in here. He's requested more. But you'll see in section 1A, there's reference to the appendice to an article for the Citizen Patriot back from 1996. There's other instances that I'm assembling that'll become part of the ordinance too. When the committee meets Tuesday, I'll have that for them. But right now, that is the big change with the discussion from the administrator that you would like to see.
So you're saying, Scott, that if Columbia Township didn't want to go through changing a lot of duplicating street names, they could sign off and accept the liability for keeping them the same?
Yeah, the ordinance would allow them to pass a resolution accepting responsibility and liability. For the administration, they would put it up to them to administer that section of the ordinance,
but they would,
which is basically the way it is right now in the existing ordinance.
But they could leave it the same.
They could leave it the
Except
same.
the liability.
Except the liability.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Scott, I think I had read in here before that it's mandatory that every address in the county be displayed. Did I recall that correctly? And
that's been in the ordinance since '06.
And is it still there?
It's still there. Nothing on the display had changed. There might have been a little wordsmithing, but nothing changed in that section of the ordinance. It still has requirements on how the sign, where the signage occurs and how, and so there's some consistency.
How would we enforce that from somebody that has had their house forever and just doesn't have it displayed? What action have we taken in the past?
The ordinance, we haven't. The ordinance puts a lot of this to the building officials in the communities. So if somebody was to say you were to make a renovation to your house, before you would get a final on your permit, you would have to meet the requirements of the display, and it says that in the ordinance. That's like the last person with boots at a place, so eventually you come into it. I think with enough education of the community, most people would fix their addresses if they knew what the requirement was. I think it becomes an education process for the communities and the county, probably with the people. But it's been there since '06. And almost all, as far as I know, all new addresses have usually come in compliance. And I think what I understand is that a lot of the communities have been putting that with building permit applications, so the people are aware of that when they issue the permit.
Yeah, I'm supportive of that for new construction, and I had commented myself about when somebody obtains a permit or when property changes hands, but I think you're going to find many people that just don't want to have it up there. It makes sense to have it, but I'm not generally supportive of a law that we're not going to enforce, which this technically is, for what that's worth. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in essence here, the highlighted part you have here is pretty much what we're saying is what happened in 2009, where the townships had the responsibility. So pretty much you're putting that back in this ordinance, saying if you want that responsibility and liability, you can still have it since you had it back in 2009. Is that correct?
That's correct. If they make that choice, they make that decision as a local unit, that they'll have that ability. There are some that aren't going to make that choice. They're going to allow the county to do it. I do know that.
Right. I've talked to a couple officials, both at Leone and Summit, elected officials, and generally they're in agreement and they're okay with this ordinance. But from that perspective, I guess my point would be, I have no problem putting this back in here that the townships in general or villages have the opportunity to take on this responsibility and liability, but and again, except for a couple small areas in Liberty and Hanover since 2009, they're the ones that have not done anything with it. They're the ones that haven't enforced it. So what you're saying is if they continue to do what they've always done in the past, which is nothing, they'll be responsible if something happens to somebody because of a first responder situation or what have you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. If that's the responsibility they want, then that's fine. Thank you.
Excuse me. At the last meeting, there was several comments about business or business. The expense of business is changing road names. I don't know if the street or the street number, the address number would cause problems. And I know one of the businesses personally, and it took them forever to get things straightened out. Currently, is there anything in here that would allow the committee to, because there's several businesses on a road, not to change the name, but to change the numbers or something?
The ordinance in the committee has strived to allow the committee to have some flexibility in making decisions. And one of the things in section 1D, you know, it talks about making changes to existing addresses and road names when nonconformity interferes with the accurate dispatch of, and it goes through and lists things. So that's the caveat, I think, for the committee is if it's not a problem or it's potentially not a problem, I don't think, you know, I think their intent is to look for areas that are really issues, not just to go around and change everything willy-nilly. Not to make a change for the sake of making a change. That's not the intent. And that's why it says this in the ordinance.
Thank you. Scott, using the resources you have in the audience, specifically the undersheriff in regard to the dispatch center, would you please address clarification of information regarding cell phone calls and what appears on the screen at the dispatch center? Again, we started this conversation last month, and it was good conversation. Just interested in some updated information and clarification you may have.
I can take it, or you can take it. I've just spent some time with Jason. I have a number of facts here that I'm sure the undersheriff has too. So it doesn't matter to me.
Well, I guess we can start out. Good morning. There's a few different calling platforms that we don't want to get confused because they all have their challenges and they all have their efficiencies. You know, you have your traditional landline, which for the most part is error-free to some degree. That would be the fixed phone line in the house. For the most part, the subscriber or the phone company identifies that specific phone location is coming from this spot. It's fixed, it's assigned. There can be problems when a telco or a third party who identifies these lines does not get the accurate information. And it typically occurs when you have a landline on a duplicate street within the same zip code. 4th Street in Vandercook, 4th Street in the city of Jackson. same identical ranges. Sometimes the telcos get those mixed up. Those are few and far between, but those are some of the challenges. You have VoIP, the Voice over Internet Protocol. Those are portable handsets. You could take your VoIP phone from there, you could take it downstairs, and it's going to show the same number. Those options are portable and not always identified where they actually are. The FCC has taken steps to identify VoIP locations and has given telcos a period or a range of time to comply with that. Then you have cellular calling, and then you also now have VoLTE, or Voice over LTE calling. The cellular calling, I think, is probably the biggest misunderstanding, is the telcos have, or the telecom industry has, a mandate that they must comply with a certain number of handsets, must provide a certain range. Typically, the range on a location-enabled phone is 50 to 300 meters, depending on whether you're using handset location-based technology or network-based location technology. Well, 50 to 300 meters can put you in a whole other block. There is a problem there. But what comes into another part of that problem is if the location is beyond 1,500 meters, or the carrier can't identify this location within 1,500 meters, it automatically defaults to what's called a phase 1, which means it only gives us the cell phone tower location. It won't give us where they're at. It'll say this call is hitting off of the Trip Road Tower on the 4 side, which gives us essentially the whole southwest range of Jackson County. So those location identifiers are not always there. We can rebid the call if it's a location-enabled handset, and within 15 seconds we can have the updated information. But if it's in a moving vehicle, heavy forest, trees, that type of stuff, or in a building, if that range can't be identified as less than 1,500 meters, it's going to continue to default to phase 1. The other problem, and I've personally seen this, is that depending on what side of the tower it hits off of, or depending on where this call is coming in, if you look at a cell phone tower, it's got all these sides or all these square things on it, and those are called arrays. And that is what your call goes into, gets routed from the tower to a fixed location, then it identifies it coming into us as coming from this lat and long, or this latitude and longitude location. So if you have a very busy cell phone tower, and let's say we rebid this call, it's going to keep coming off of a different side of the tower, which will give you a slightly different location. Now, we say 50 to 300 meters, but I've personally observed this when we knew we had a static position on a handset, and the GPS coordinates keep coming in all over the place, probably within a couple square mile range. So it's not as though we can rebid this, get the GPS location, we know exactly where they are. There's a plus or minus range where we may not be able to identify exactly where they are. So that is how the system works. It is good technology because it is able to move it down. And when you have something like we have a vehicle description of maybe an Alzheimer's patient who we know is going down the highway, that's good information. We only have to look in a certain stretch for this type of vehicle. If you're looking for somebody who can't talk or who's unable to communicate or something, that does present some challenges. But there's been some measures passed by the FCC, and hopefully within the next several years they're going to increase that accuracy. They're going to make certain requirements among the telecom industry to provide these things, but there's still going to be a plus-minus range because not everything is completely accurate off those handsets.
Under Sheriff, just a couple of quick questions. If I remember right, 50 meters is 164 feet. Close?
Yeah, I'll take your word on it.
Yeah, I'm working from memory, so I could be wrong. And the question came up last time we talked about this. The equipment that we put in is the most current equipment, and it's able to accept the information that's transmitted from the phone company about location when they transmit it, I assume, correct?
It is, and we talked a lot about that, is when the telecom industry, because obviously they're fighting for their own, their own services and their own networks. When a definition is decided that, hey, this is going to be the requirement to transmit this information to PSAPs, or public safety answering points, we can accept any of that information. It's a flexible platform. It can accept any of the new technologies coming in, but that hasn't been decided yet. For instance, one of the major telecom carriers is only required to get us 60% of their calls with a phase 2 identifier. So 40% of the handsets aren't even required to have that information transmitted to us, either based on the age of the handset, model, etc. Roughly 55 to 60% of our total call volume is cellular. That's just the way that everyone's transitioning. So.
Okay, and then one more if I can. there's been brief mention about the article that's attached to the ordinance, which was 96 fatal fire or explosion in Napoleon. And if you read through the call narrative on that, it's abundantly clear that was just completely human error. It was mentioned at least twice in there, I think, that it was Napoleon Township. And we can't account for human error. I mean, we can do the best to overcome it with technology, but in that case, it was just entirely human error. And when we talk about many times the equipment is only going to give us a cell tower location, I'm curious if that displays on the map. For instance, you talk about the cell tower location could be off radically from where the person's at, but realistically, if it's talking about Austin Street in the city or Austin Avenue in the city versus Austin Street in Napoleon, just the cell tower location is going to tell them where that's at, I would think, using that as an example, correct?
Yeah, and that is one of the efficiencies, is they will give us the cell tower location, so you're right. If we know that we're hitting off of the Austin Road Tower in Napoleon Township, we know that we're not in the city of Jackson. But use the variable, and again, I'll go back to 4th Street, or maybe even Lakeview. It seems like every lake has a Lakeview. You get a call coming in from Lakeview, and it's hitting off the tower at MIS. Is that Lake Columbia, or is it Wampler's, or is it one of the other many lakes? And that's just an example. 4th Street would be another example. It's hitting off of the Horton Road Tower. Well, which 4th Street is that? So, again, you have your efficiencies because you can identify or you can reduce it down to a segment of the county, but then you also have your challenges because not all those situations are going to be cut clean like that. So, we'll work with what we have and try to overcome those challenges, and I think we can probably use what we have to address most of those.
I've got one more point, but it's not necessarily for the undersheriff. You want it now, or want me to wait? Just the clause that we've built in here. I appreciate the work of Scott and the committee on the ordinance so far. I'm trying to get to that one paragraph that's got all the highlighting on it, but it talks about allowing townships or villages to opt out if they accept responsibility and liability, is what I recall reading. And I guess I have to ask, if that was us, how would we feel? I think a word that we're inserting in there is going to be objected to, or you'll find municipalities not necessarily willing to say, sure, we'll take the liability for that. If it was the county, would we be willing to put wording in a resolution that we accept liability for something? We certainly, many times, take responsibility for things, but to put that wording in a resolution that you're willing to accept the liability for it is not something I would recommend that we ever do. So why would we want to necessarily mandate inserting that in a resolution that some other body is going to pass? They certainly may want to take responsibility for it, but I can't see that they'd want to vote yes to accept liability for something necessarily. Thank you. Well, I guess I'm first asking my fellow commissioners if that's something that you would ever vote to accept for the county. If some government entity above us was trying to either push something down to us, would we ever accept that wording, adopt a resolution that says, sure, we'll take the liability for that? I don't think we would. I wouldn't, I don't think.
We had this discussion Monday. I happened to stop in the office when Scott was talking to Mike Overton. Currently, as the ordinance stands now, the county is already responsible. So if this happens again and somebody sues us, which they could, I mean, easily, because we're not doing our part to be safe and precise on names, addresses, all that. And as it is now, we are responsible. And that's the problem. The townships have a problem with the readdressing, and they're bringing it down to the money issue. And that's not the issue. I mean, the issue is we want people to be safe. We don't need more dead people because they went to the wrong side of 4th Street or the wrong side of Michigan Ave or whatever. We know there's going to be human error. But I think that if we just do what they want to do in this ordinance and get things straightened out and names in accordance with the ordinance and the addressing, straightened out as well, we won't have that issue. And I understand that, they have multiple issues in, like, Phil's area, and it is going to be a little costly. But realistically, we are responsible for that now. So if something happens and we let them just say, you know what, we don't care, you can just leave your name street the same. But when somebody ends up dead because they went to the wrong one, which I had in Sandstone Township in my 10 years, in these last 2 years, when you're having to deal with that widow, it makes a difference. And to me, a few dollars and a few hours to make all the changes, because I also own a business, I know what it takes to change your address with the IRS, all that stuff. Yeah, it's a little inconvenient. But, if you're going to stand there and talk to a widow and tell her, well, I didn't want to spend the $100 in time and paperwork and making a sign, sorry your husband's dead, I didn't feel like it. That's not acceptable to me. And, public safety is our #2 priority in the county. And it was #1 for a long time. And I think we really are losing sight of that in these minor changes in this ordinance. So, I don't know, maybe Scott can talk more about the liability issue on that was discussed on Monday.
I can do any way you wish. She's correct. That element of what was put into the ordinance came through a discussion with Mr. Overton, and that's what Mr. Overton is suggesting and would like. He wants people to know, and communities to know, that if they want out of that section of the ordinance, is that the county is willing to accept the liability. They know they have liability all right, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, but he's the belief and the understanding that the county is liable. That if you know there's problems and something happens, you become liable. I mean, you're going to get sued no matter what, I guess. But he wants the communities to understand that if they want out of this, the county is accepting liability with an ordinance. And if the communities want to assume responsibility for that section, they can assume the liability too. I think that was my gist of the discussion with Mr. Overton. Is I've had discussion and he's seen what's written in here, and he likes what he was reading. At least that's what he elaborated to me yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so Scott, what you're saying is, in response to what Commissioner Elwell said, all along we've had the liability then anyway, correct?
Yeah,
is that what you're
it's your
saying?
ordinance.
So, the comment that the county may not want the liability, well, we have the liability. So we as a county have been willing to step up to the plate and say, if we're going to take the responsibility, we're going to take the liability. And that's the way it should be. If I'm going to be responsible for something, then I should be liable for it. And if townships don't want to be liable for it, you know what? From my perspective, that's on them, okay? Because they're the ones that are going to be wanting to opt out on this, if they do opt out. And if they do opt out, to me, responsibility and liability go hand in hand. And from my perspective, if they don't like that, I'll be frank here, too bad. And the next thing is, I'd like to make a comment here too, is that, Commissioner Leiter made some good points about somebody dying. She made some good points about things of that nature. But let's also keep in mind that when you have first responders, you also have situations where you want somebody there as quick as possible because potentially a child's being abused, potentially a lady's, there's a domestic violence going on and a lady's being struck several times. You have situations where somebody calls and say, somebody's breaking in my house. So this goes well beyond, from a safety factor, just the higher end things of severe injury and death. There's a multitude of reasons why it's important that we get this right, so our first responders have the best opportunity to get to their location as quickly as possible. And to me, it seems like we just continue to we just continue to address this over and over again. I know we want to get it right, but you know, at some point we just have to step up and say, you know what, this isn't political. This is the right thing for the people that we serve. Let's just do it. Thank you.
Well, 3 questions here. I don't like I know the townships or villages would accept the responsibility. I think if we include liability in there too, we're just putting a bullseye on it, saying, here, sue me if you got an issue. Of course, it would probably happen anyhow, but if you went in front of a jury on a suit, it seemed like it'd be cut and dry, because we're saying, we're liable. I don't like that part of it. Another question I have here is, can an individual, let's say Columbia Township opts out, can an individual with a duplicating address request the county addressing committee to change my address?
No.
Why?
Because the community accepted that responsibility, and when they give us a resolution saying they're going to do that, it takes the county out of the administration of that section of the ordinance, making changes.
So
it has to come at a request from the community at that point. They would have to go to their township, and the township has to make the request for the committee to review it.
Not meaning to be argumentative, but if you're concerned about my safety, and I say my address is 105 Main Street, and there's a duplicate 105, and I say, can you change it to 107, there's not a duplicate, then you're not concerned about my safety, because I'm asking the county to just simply change my address. And you're saying...
But that community, by passing a resolution, giving it to the county, that community has told you, I don't want the county to make any changes in my township. We'll initiate the changes. That's what they're saying.
I think...
I don't think we can have it both ways in an ordinance. I don't know how to write it.
From one end of the spectrum clear to the extreme other end. There should be some middle there.
You know,
I want to request
so who
my
picks and
address
chooses
changed.
and what you can do? We become, to me, that puts us in the middle. Puts me in the middle, puts the committee in the middle of an unpopular decision for some people. I mean, you know, you're either stepping on a community's toes or you're not. I mean, there's a lot of issues. I don't think you can have it both ways. I don't. That's my personal opinion. I mean,
Not
sure,
many
it's
people had issues with the changing of the numbers. It was street naming changes that was the big sticking point.
and
That's a lot different than just changing some number ranges.
we can change it just to street name. I mean, it's, you know, that could be a discussion of the committee if the board so wishes. I mean, we could rewrite it so it's only street names that the community's accepting responsibility for.
I think that was the biggest part of the issue that my area had. But when we have a Lakeview issue where the gentleman cut his arm with a chainsaw very badly, a number change, street address number change could have fixed that.
You know,
And if he wanted to request, I don't want a duplicating number.
But the two are somewhat related, and I can see some instances where if you make a change on, and I'll say a private drive, the county's ordinance says all private drives shall be named. So if somebody wants to request a change, does that triggers the element of a name change? Or there's so many homes on a private drive, it requires that they be named. The private drives over 2, a third lot or structure. That's in the ordinance too. So I mean, there becomes some, I don't know, it could be written that way. I think you're still going to have some people that interpret it different ways. And that's what has happened in the past with the ordinance, and this revision tried to clarify a lot of interpretation problems by people. But it certainly could be written that way.
Okay.
I don't know how it would be implemented, how easy it would be to implement.
Well, the other way, in my eyes, was overkill. We're going to end up something like Alibaba Avenue, because we're going to run out of words, street names, if we, you know, Columbia has 108. The Village of Brooklyn has 20 that need to be changed. We're going to run out of sensible street names if we can't have any duplicating street name. So it's kind of overkill, and there's got to be something in the middle that'll work. And I appreciate everything you've done.
I'm not taking it personally.
Yeah,
I'm just telling you
I'm
how.
saying, you and I worked on one on Rexford Road a while back, and where a new house was going in, and we had to change 5 or 6 people's addresses to make a
To
sensible
accommodate an
address.
address. That's
But
right. And
we
those
found-
are going to still occur.
Yeah, but you found a way to do it, and it made everybody happy, and I don't know. I just think the first version that we just discussed last month was harsh and a little bit of overkill. In Michigan, you have a lot of Michigan streets and Michigan avenues.
Again, you know, in the language I read to you is that when nonconformity interferes with the accurate dispatch of, and it goes on, blah, blah, and names that. I mean, that's the intent. It's not the intent that every Michigan Ave or every 3rd Street or every, that's not what you're saying in this ordinance. It allows for areas that are problems. In the case of Austin, you know, you had one in the city, you had one, and it's unfortunate a vehicle was dispatched to the wrong area. But that's what happens. You have a duplicate address and a duplicate name, surname. Suffixes can be a problem if somebody doesn't relate the suffix to the carrier. You know, the last few days we spent a lot of time with Central Dispatch, Lieutenant Hammond, checking cell technology. We've been testing the cell technology. Because that's become a big a topic of discussion. Undersheriff told you 60%. You know, we tested 3 different carriers: AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. We had a person check 3. One instance was on Sharon Valley Road. Phase 1 puts it at a tower in Brooklyn, 6 miles away from the location of where the person was. The first call the person gave, it got handed off to a tower in Lenawee County, went to Lenawee County Central Dispatch. That call got relayed to Jackson. It didn't come through a star. I didn't understand the star, which is where Lenawee County would push a button and send it to Jackson, and it comes through as a 911 call. This call came through the administrative line. It shows as a landline coming through. No location information came through on that. In fact, the person that works for me that was out doing that, there was nothing in the background for almost 10 seconds. He said it was just dead air. He thought he got hung up on at that point. And then our central picked the call up because it took that time, but there was nothing in between. So you have possibilities. Technology isn't always the answer. In that case, there wouldn't have been any information relate XY coordinates, so the dispatchers would have been, you know, they're out on a limb on that one to make the call. When he did call back, the phase 1 put it at, like I said, a cell tower 6 miles away, which could be a larger issue if the phase 2 doesn't come through. And I watched as the undersheriff mentioned, the call originally comes in as phase 1. The dispatcher has to physically push for phase 2. He said 15 seconds is right. That's if it hits that time. I observed a number of calls that it didn't. It took 3-4 times to get a phase 2 location. You know, and the carriers indicated that, you know, in GPS technology or the XY coordinate technology, I sat in on Remine Invitation with the surveyors earlier this week. The requirement next year is that they provide the Remine corners in an XY coordinate from a GPS unit. That's okay, but even them in their discussion, you don't always get a coordinate. I mean, you have to have the right amount of satellites. You know, you got tree coverage, it's a problem. So it's not always that they're talking that they're going to have to go out and revisit that corner to try to get at different times of the day or different parts of the year. So it adds to their expense. The same thing works here, you know, based on you have a lot of people still with flip phones or slide phones. They're not as accurate. Yeah, you still got one. Yeah. The technology in that phone isn't as accurate as your newer phones. So it allows for the ability to be a problem. I'm not saying it always is a problem. The chance of that is a problem. And also, you know, the coordinate, according to the carriers, is based on their volume of traffic on their network. It affects the ability for them to give that phase 2. And the other one is the availability of satellites. So the satellites just aren't in line. It doesn't give you an accurate. And, you know, on 300 meters, I did put together a map, and Jason and I did, and, you know, in the city, you're stretching from Blackstone all the way down to Consumers Energy. From standing in front of this building is 300 meters, and it stretches to the north up to Homewild and south to Wesley. That's a large area to try to get to, or find somebody.
I have one other question.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll be through, if I may. My computer was down for 2 days, and I didn't realize that my password had crashed or something. But the newly rewritten ordinance that you've been working on since we last met, does it allow for 2 Michigan streets in the county?
It says the
If it's
same
not an
thing.
issue?
The only thing it changed, and again, this hasn't been to the committee. The committee meets Tuesday. These changes were following a discussion with Mr. Overton that occur in here, and the committee will be looking at them. I don't know if the committee, you know, will have a problem with this, honestly. Part of the feeling is you can't fix everything in one day anyhow.
Well, it said before that you couldn't have any duplicating street names, duplicating
It's the intent
spells.
to eliminate those, but it also says when nonconformity interferes with the accurate dispatch of vehicles. So it allows for that common sense. That's not the intent of the ordinance or even anybody on that committee that you're going to go sue and nobody can have Michigan Avenue. That's not the intent. The intent in your ordinance says when it interferes with the accurate dispatch, when there's an issue, when there's a problem, it'll be looked at, you know.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a couple of things, and I first want to say I agree with Scott on what Phil was talking about a Columbia resident bypassing Columbia and trying to come to the county. That can't work. And I agree with what you posed there. And the discussion has been about life-saving. I agree, but it has to be about other things as well. And I think with the Austin Road incident, to clarify something you said, Scott, that was, I think you said, car was sent to the wrong address. Well, to be clear, that wasn't a 911 error. I think 911 twice said Napoleon Township. That was just completely human error, that we can never entirely fix that no matter what we do. But one of the key streets when I talked to my local elected officials was Blackman Road. And there's a Blackman Street in the city. And that's one that could certainly be an issue. And the first thing the supervisor said when I talked to him was the name Blackman Road came from the founder of the township. And that's what you're butting heads with. And the same thing in Brooklyn, I'm sure, with some of their street names. Scott, can you point to me where in the proposed ordinance it says that the county accepts liability?
It doesn't specifically say the county accepts liability in there.
Exactly.
But it's your ordinance. It's your ordinance.
But I say the same thing
liable.
about what we're asking the townships and villages to do. It's a given, I think, that if they're taking it on, they're taking on the liability, and I think that's enough. And what I've said is abundantly clear here. We would not put in print that we're accepting liability for anything. I think it makes us more liable, the same as it would them. And I would be supportive of this, I think, if that word was out of there. If we left it to the townships and villages, if they want to take it on, it's their responsibility, and that should be enough. You add that inflammatory word of liability, and there's something that we've not even done for ourselves, and I wouldn't vote for if we were trying to insert it in our language. If that was out, I'd be supportive of this. One thing I still do not like is there's no mechanism for enforcement for making people put addresses on their homes. We say we're going to put it in here. We don't say whether we are or are not going to enforce it. I don't like that. I think you recognize the importance of safety and dispatching, but again, that's the big issue for me. Thank you.
The issue on the liability, I think Adam would be better to talk to that, but that came, again, that didn't come out of committee, that came from your administrator. So in discussion with him is that, and so
well, but
that part is something you need to talk, I think, with the administration on. And
I'm saying it here that we're asking local governments to do something that we're not inclined to do ourselves. And I'm not saying that to you. I'm saying that to us.
In an issue of display, there is a mechanism. It becomes the building official in that community to make sure that the ordinance is adhered to, and it says that in the ordinance.
Commissioner Alexander.
Thank you. For the sake of reference, 2006 ordinance, 2009 ordinance, 2014 proposed revised ordinance. When we talk about responsibility of these ordinances, there are 5 commissioners that sit on this current board that proposed and voted for the first 2 ordinances. So if modifications are needed, as many are, and many have been made, then we can address those. But it's not as if it's a new ordinance. This county ordinance has been in place since 2006 and voted on by the Board of Commission at that time. That's point number 1. Point number 2, I created a matrix in which it shows me all the similarities in 2006, 2009, and 2014. The most important piece of it, in addition to the process in which issues are brought to the committee, in my opinion, is the final one I stated, that the Jackson County Board of Commissioners reserves the sole right to revise and rescind any portion of this ordinance as it deems appropriate. So those who are in objection, we've heard 1, take out the word take out the word liability. I appreciate that suggestion on behalf of being a board member. Give us specific suggestions as to what it is that you have objections with. Scott, where in the ordinance, maybe it'll take you a second, you continue to refer to the biggest confusion, an area I believe needs to be referenced right now, is that this committee does not intend to change every Main Street, Michigan Street, Lakeview, etc. Can you point out the sentence in the ordinance and then tell us, was it in the 06 and the 09 as well as the 14?
It refers in section 1D, and it's the comment I've been making, and it talks about the Street Address Review Committee, that the ordinance shall establish a Street Naming Address Review Committee for the purpose of reviewing, it has inserted, and making changes to existing addresses and road names when nonconformity interferes with the accurate dispatch of emergency vehicles, county services, or U.S. mail delivery services which affect the community's health, safety, and welfare. That has always been in the ordinance.
And that is in
The
all
only
3,
thing
yes.
it's been inserted is "and making," and that came through a discussion with Mr. Overton too.
And in your 8 years of having this ordinance in place in the county, has the committee, have you as the GIS Administrator Coordinator ever moved forward with changing any of these street names that are duplicates?
No, that hasn't. There's been a few that have been, well, I don't know if it's any duplicates. I think, no, not necessarily. Not that I can actually remember.
Quack, quack. I just want you to know this is from a lame duck. You can't, I think the word liability, I think, needs to be there. These people, when a township says, we don't want any we'll take the responsibility, if they don't see it, that they got the liability, they get sued. They go, well, wait a minute, we didn't take it, you guys got that. I mean, the original law says, I mean, we're responsible for everything. Now, if we want to get, I mean, it's like the guy driving down the road that hits a telephone pole. He's going to sue consumers, Detroit Edison, anybody he can think of, the farmer who owns the field, or if the pole's on the right of way, he's going to sue the road commission. I mean, they're going to sue everybody anyway. But if you these local officials are going to say, oh, well, we didn't accept any liability, and I keep saying, you can't allow or put things in the ordinance, bypass it. You got to take it all or nothing. You start making these little changes, you make it all confusing as to, oh, can I jump over the township if I don't like it, what the township's telling me? I just...
Just a quick note here. I understand Commissioner Elwell's struggle with the word liability. But on the flip side, you know, Jackson County obviously has numerous departments, agencies, and so on and so forth. And throughout Jackson County, we have enormous responsibilities with these departments and agencies. And when these departments and agencies are working within the townships, if there is a liability issue that one of our county departments is involved in, obviously the county is going to be liable ultimately. And Commissioner Lutschko makes a good point. If you have responsibility in there for a township and something happens, obviously the county is going to be right in the mix of being part of the liability as well. So I really think we need to take that into consideration and really give it some thought. And this might help. This also might help Commissioner Duckham. Just so you know, there's in the world there's 32 million names, so I don't think we'll run out of names. Okay.
Yeah, I can agree with what Commissioner Quack says there, but David, you know, yeah, everybody's gonna get sued on an issue, but you know, you're taking away any defense a township or a village would have when you say I'm liable. There may be reasons why they're not liable, and how can a village or a township attorney go to court when it specifically says you're liable? You just bring your checkbook. Forget your attorney, just bring your checkbook, and you've taken all the any defense the village or the township might have away from them. That should be to a judge and a jury, and I think it's pretty much implied that if they take the responsibility, they're liable, but to say right up front you're liable, it means they're guilty in my book. And it's just, like I say, don't bring your attorney, bring your checkbook and ask the people what they'll settle for. And I think I don't like the word there. It just, like I say, there could be situations where they're responsible, but maybe they're not liable. Maybe the person is liable. They could be responsible, but when you say you're liable, it's like you say I'm guilty. And I don't like that. Thank you.
We have the committee meeting at 10:30 Tuesday. That's a public meeting. If commissioners would like to attend and continue to express their opinion, I'm sure the committee would be open to that. I think we need to kind of move on here. We're starting to duplicate our discussion.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask
Yes.
one more question of Adam?
Sure.
Know that he's speaking for the administrator's office. Adam, would you approve of or recommend inserting a sentence in our ordinance that says the county accepts all liability associated with this ordinance?
I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I mean, obviously, anytime something, it does carry gravity, but I do support the administrator in his, that the responsibility and the liability need to remain together, whether that is on the county or whether that is on the township. When you separate the responsibility from the liability, the incentives are not there to do the right thing.
Okay, 10:30 Tuesday. We have all weekend to continue discussing this, and is Michael going to be here Monday? I don't remember.
He is. Yeah.
So, yeah, and he'll be here Monday, so there'll be opportunities to discuss this with the administrator and his reasoning behind the choice of words. Mr. Brown, the next item.
The next item is non-union employees 2015 compensation, and actually before we go to that one, I do want to thank the Undersheriff and Mr. Ames for their work and follow up on these issues that are obviously important to everybody. And but again, the next item is the non-union compensation and benefits. As you know, we are negotiating with 11 bargaining units at this time. We have the first collective bargaining agreement coming before you at the December meeting. And I'm hopeful that we have a second one to bring to you also. If you recall, we had anticipated doing a study of wages in 2015, and the vendors who do that type of work are so backed up that we're not going to be able to engage in a contract with them until April of this year, which makes our former strategy going into negotiations a little different. So we met and came up with a different strategy. And so just like the collective bargaining agreements are coming before you for consideration, this basically is, while not a contract, the non-union benefit package that we're proposing this year. So I'm just going to run through the tenets of that package. There are basically three, and one's kind of a two-part one. The first one would be compensation, and we're recommending 1% compensation for non-union employees, and that will be in line with what the collective bargaining agreements that are coming before you this month will be. That cost for that is $109,000. The actual general fund cost is somewhat less than that. That $109,000 covers multiple funds. So, and the second item is the pay time off, and there's really two parts to that one. And Donald, if you could start that show for me. This is a presentation that I sent to the non-union employees and the department heads, and also to the, thank you, Donald. Sent this to the department heads to share with their employees, and also to the union officials as we've met with them and discussed the issue with them. So right now, the employees get paid every other week for their paycheck. That's 26 times a year. And I asked them to think about, what if you had to work all year for that paycheck and then just get one at the end of the year? That would be difficult for most people, to work all year and then get a paycheck. But essentially that's how we do the PTO with our employees. They work all year, they're earning and accruing PTO, but they don't get paid until the very end. So what we're talking about is paying them every 2 weeks in PTO. It's not a change in the benefit level, it's a change in the way they receive it. So basically, let's see, this is meant for the employees to watch on there without having to do much, so I'll try to stop it here. They currently earn PTO, but they're not credited until the end of the year. So what we want to do is change the way we give that to them. There are some barriers that this causes, the way that we do it. And for new employees, it's particularly become an attraction problem, because we hire somebody, and one person in the health department we hired who had 20 years of experience at a high-level position. And we said, you know, you can only take 5 days the first year. And that's very difficult for somebody that long. I know if you have kids, that 5 days can be swallowed up with just them being sick. And so that makes it hard. So one of the things this biweekly accrual does is it takes that away automatically, because instead of earning it and not seeing it until their last, at the end of the year, they can actually use it as they earn it. So that really takes that out of the equation, which is something we've touted to the union and non-union employees. And like I said, it also, not only being sick, but the other thing makes difficult is on short-term disability. Short-term disability kicks in after the 8th day, which is at least 5 working days. So you're required to supplement the short-term disability with your own paid time off. Well, if you're trying to get down to that number at the end of your year, because you can only carry over so many days, that puts you in a very vulnerable position where you've only got 5 days because your anniversary's coming up and you can't carry over, and you've had to supplement with your PTO for that short-term disability, and then all of a sudden you're gone, you're on short-term disability, which only pays 2/3 of your time, and you're expected to supplement, but then there's nothing to supplement. So it's very difficult for that reason. So under this proposal, instead of getting that 5 days, and they right now they only get it after 90, they have to work 90 days, which is still being proposed. We'd keep the probation period. They'd get their, right now the benefits at 15. They could use it as soon as they earn it, whereas otherwise they just have that 5 days throughout the year. So I will attach this show to the board docs because I didn't think to put that in before today, but so you can read this. Some of this print's a little bit smaller. But the other thing is, right now there's a cap on what they can carry over, and that needs to remain because that puts a limit on the liability out for the county. Sorry to use that word, Commissioner Elwell, but when we have unlimited carryover of PTO, then that's a lot of money that's on the books that we have to pay out at some point. So instead of having an annual cap, carryover cap, what we do is we turn that into a cap that's consistent with that carryover. We add the number of days they would get of vacation leave plus the amount that they can carry over currently to make a hard cap, a ceiling. So when they get, so for instance, a new employee right now gets 15 days, they can carry over 5 at the end of their years, and at the end of the year, so that's 20 days. So that becomes the new cap. An employee keeps earning PTO each pay period, but when they hit that cap, they stop earning PTO. That means that they have to manage it so that they're at least using it as fast as it comes, and then they can maintain that cap as long as they want. So let's see if there's any. So I think I just worked through some of the.
Commissioner Liska has a question.
Yes, go ahead.
To make it simple, let's say that an employee gets 13 days a year. Every pay, are they going to get half a day added to their balance?
Yes, okay. That's exactly how it works out.
I think that's totally fair. When I worked with the Treasury Department, that's after our probation period. That's all we got. If every payday you got a little bit of what you earned, and after you're there 32 years like I was, every payday you got more. You got a whole day and a half off, because the way the schedule was. But they didn't have a hard cap there, and I think this is very beneficial and to the employees, plus fair to everybody.
And responsible on the county's behalf.
Adam, on this hard cap, what if an employee leaves employment? Do they get paid their accrued PTO?
Under this way, they are current, and they would get that PTO paid out at 75%, which is the policy, because when it was merged between vacation and sick time, it was understood that part of that, it's to be used for either or, so that's why the reason was 75% payout and not 100% payout.
But they take it with them if they leave employment?
Yes.
Okay, 75% of...
75% of what that benefit
Thank you.
is. Yep. So I won't try to spend that much time on here. It sounds like everybody understands. This is actually more consistent with most of the places and businesses that at least I've worked for, and many of our employees have worked for in the past. So, and like I said, I'll pass that on, this presentation on to you. Any other questions on the biweekly payroll or biweekly accrual part of it? Okay. I guess there's just a couple other things I have to mention. Because we'll have to select a date, and it's not going to be able to be January 1 because of that's something it's going to take a little bit of time. Our new financial software, BSNA, supports this type of accrual, and so that's not going to be a problem, but it is going to take some time. So what we have to do is set a date. For example, if we said April 1st is the conversion date, we'd have to pay them for what they've earned from their last anniversary up until that date, conversion date. So it's a prorated payout, not in cash, but in leave. And then they start accruing at that rate for the first bracket of employees, it's 4.6 hours per pay period. So, and then what we're asking them to do is create a grace period of 6 months for them, so that if that one-time dump of leave at the change date happens, they can work to get that down under the cap and they don't lose anything. So we're not trying to take anything away from the employees in this process. So the second part of that is we are recommending a benefit level. We change for the earlier employees, and we're also expect that some of the collective bargaining agreements may come back with this recommendation also, and that is just to compress the earlier years of the benefit level so that it's just a 20, 25, 30 days of PTO. Most of the employees in our non-union category are professional level employees with experience and degrees, and given that that is sick and vacation time, these levels are what we're recommending the change to. And then the third part of the non-union package that we're proposing is known as an IDI, an individual disability insurance. We were made aware of a gap in our coverage that has gone unseen for some time. We understood our short-term disability package to cover 60% of the employees' wages if they're, heaven forbid, there be some type of situation where they have to collect long-term disability. What we didn't understand was that it's a $3,000 cap on that benefit. So employees over $60,000 not going to see that 60%. So we asked our McGraw-Wentworth to look at some type of package that would supplement the current long-term disability plan, and he received two proposals. One from Unum, I believe is how he told me to say it, Unum, that would supplement at the 60% rate for all of our employees. So that would come at a cost of $31,896. So if you put those three things together, and this is basically your non-union package for 2015, that would be $140,896 that we're asking you to approve in committee and then at the full board. And with that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions on that item. Yes, it is.
Thank you, Adam.
So the next item on the agenda is the Riverwalk project, and this has been a while coming, but I think 2 months ago you approved the agreement with Allegiance, and we're working forward to closing that deal. I believe the only thing we're waiting on is the city to change the boundary lines that you approved, and then we can actually close on that project. But knowing that we have an agreement that both Allegiance and the county have approved, we're recommending going forward with the project. We had it bid out, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Shealy.
Good morning. In front of you, you have staff report for the final phase of the restoration of Riverwalk. We had planned on our budget was $250,000 for this final phase. Our quote came in under. We wanted to get this going as quickly as we could, just so we could take advantage of just in case we had nice weather, they could start it on it sooner instead of later. And we had 2 contractors show up at our mandatory pre-bid, and they both joined forces and put forth 1 quote. So because of the cost in that, we wanted to bring it to the study session, and if there are any questions or if we needed to have any discussions, we could do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rick, I have a question. You may not know it right now. Maybe you have an estimation. When you had this $224,705 from our Public Improvement Fund, or Capital Improvement Fund, what's going to be the total cost from the time that we originally passed a resolution of $1.8 million? Where are we at now when you add this $200-some thousand of total cost that we've put into getting this structure, if you want to call it that, or this small piece of land? Can you give me an estimation of what we've put into it?
You're correct. I would have to bring that information on Monday.
Okay.
Carl, I can give you that number. The 250,000 is within the original project budget of 1.75 million.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
I guess that's it. For one more item. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate your work on that. And the next item is the 2015-2016 budget. And Donald's going to pull that up for me. So as you know, I always try to pick some schools to go for the color scheme of our budget, and I decided we'd go with our Jackson High School colors, which are orange and black. Hopefully I got the right shade of orange. I always seem to get criticized on the shade that I pick, so, you know, Microsoft only limits us to so many colors. But anyway, this is the first glimpse of the 2016 budget that you've been able to have. And dollars and cents wise, we're really on target where we thought we'd be. We anticipated that we'd be about $1 million, you know, from a structural balance. And we're a little bit over that as all the departments submitted their things. We had anticipated using $500,000 in fund balance and then making $500,000 in cuts for the 2016. We also, though, when we did the budget last year, we didn't figure out the airport. We knew it was out there, we mentioned it, and we said that's something we have to address. That's going to have to happen in 2015, but as you probably know, you don't pay the debt service until after your first year. So that's going to hit us for the first time in 2016. And so we have to address that in this budget. So if you add that to the $1 million, you're looking at, we're expecting a debt service payment on that runway of $400,000 to $500,000.
The airport board at our last meeting received some very good news from the federal level. I don't see Kent in the room. It appears he had to leave. But we have been allocated our funding at a 2.5% level. We were at that during the Bush era, and we had a gap, and we were concerned that it was going to move back out to a 5% cap level of local contribution. And due to some very good work on the part of people who lobbied in Washington, we're able to hold our 2.5% level of contribution for the next 4 years also, which will end up saving the county a considerable amount of money. And on top of that, the state aviation has also put forward that they're willing to come up with all of their discretionary funds and allocating them to the Jackson project over the next 2 years also. So it appears that our airport has become the target of success within the state of Michigan and also is picking up discretionary funds out of the FAA budget. So we do have some strong allies in Washington and in Lansing that have been helping us get this project wrapped up and continue moving our airport forward, which is good news. But on the other side of it, we are going to have to try to figure out a way to pay for the landfill service.
Yeah, that certainly does, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Help us on the runway cost and our share of that. That's a considerable savings of probably several $100,000. That the landfill relocation is what we're talking about. That's $5.5 million, and that's what we're talking about needs the debt service. But that certainly helps us, and we need more news like that. So one of the other things that we were thinking of as we were exploring this 2-year budgeting process is what are the implications of adopting a budget 2 years out. And as we were thinking about these, two things came to our mind. One is the court system, because of their distinguished status as a co-employer with the county. Once you budget something to the courts, you can't undo it. It is permanent. They are allowed to work within that budget, but without permission, you cannot reduce their budget. The same goes with the child care fund. Once we put money into the child care fund, we can't take it out. We can reduce, as we have in the past couple years, our contributions to it in future years, but we can't undo it. So what we're recommending when we bring you a final budget is that we adopt the first year, but you approve a draft budget for the second year. And so the document would so note that 2015 adopted, 2016 approved draft, and then you haven't actually adopted it. When you come back the next year, that second year will now be your first year, then you can adopt it officially, and we won't be bound to that draft that we come up with. So again, we're trying to feel our way through this and explore the 2-year budget. All the departments did finish their submissions to the budget, and if we did nothing today, that's an increase of $800,000 from the 2015 budget, but that includes the same amount of fund balance use as we have in 2015, which was not in the works. We have about $1.5 million in fund balance left. But like I said, that would include $1.3 million of that $1.5 million. That's not what we planned. What we planned was to split that over to the 16 and 17. As you recall from last year, we did the 5-year plan had us hitting that fund balance ceiling that we have by policy in 2016 and 2017.
Adam, those figures take into account what the committee believes the increase in property values and taxes will be. Also, it factors that in, correct?
It does. However, I think we're going to be a little bit better than we planned, is what it's looking right now. So we may see, and when I say a little bit better, we're talking about maybe 1% to 0.5%, so $100,000 to $200,000. Helps us a little bit, but doesn't solve the full problem. So what do we have still to do for this, to bring a budget for you for 2 years? We have to review the individual department requests, which we haven't done yet. At least go over them specifically. We haven't looked at the additional FTE requests, which we believe there are at least a couple. And we need some individual meetings with department heads and elected officials to go over those requests and then strategize to fill that gap. So what we're still looking at doing is trying to split that up, come up with some efficiencies or cuts that bring us halfway there. We can still use fund balance in 16. That'll leave a little bit in 17, and then hopefully we'll be structurally balanced at the end of that. So what we're working for is to bring you something in January that's, again, would be revisions to 2015 and a draft for 17. And then, before we know it, late spring, we'll be back into the cyclical process, and the new normal for us for budget was we'll start in April with intent to bring you something for adoption in November each year. And I believe that's all I have for the budget update. We'll be working on it hard over the holiday. Any questions on 1516? And the last item on the agenda is the Cascades update. We sent out a press release yesterday, I believe it was, for the groundbreaking ceremony. It'll be next Monday at 8 a.m. at the Wall. And we're working with some Spring Arbor students to plan the event, and they're done the posters and promos for us. It's pretty neat. When you see some of the artwork that comes out, that'll be from our own Spring Arbor University students. We have also surpassed the $10,000 match grant from the Jackson Community Foundation. So we're able to match dollar for dollar all $10,000 of that. And we've actually gone a little bit beyond that. What we are looking forward to now is phase 2, and what we're really in need of is to start the engineering on that so that we can go out and get the grants for that. A lot of the grantors and the foundations and donors want a timeline, they want a cost, something more concrete than we have right now. What we have is a very high level engineering. So I'll let the chairman of the champion team add some comments to that.
Oh, first thing, I'd like to thank the previous committee who created a tool that we could work with the Spicer Group. You did a wonderful job. You made our job a lot easier. In May was our first meeting. It's now December and we're tearing the wall down. I think that that's an impressive goal. We've raised either in-kind or in hard cash donations of close to $240,000. $500,000. We have local contractors in the names of Dunnigan Brothers, Lester Brothers, and Bailey Construction who are going to be on site for that. And they tell me that if everything goes normal and progresses, 7 days that wall will be down and the barrier fence will be up, and we'll be looking at spreading sod come spring. I think Scott Robbins should be commended for his work with this, and he's been doing all the behind-scenes coordination, and Rick, and and the other companies that have stepped forward. Miller Truck and Storage has gotten in there and separated the chairs and made them so we can move them to the fairgrounds and put them in storage. And our Parks Board and Department have stepped up and taken pictures and historically categorized all the chairs that were donated. So they're not going to be thrown away. If somebody asks you about where their chair is, it's going to be there. And I really think that this is an exciting step forward, and it's all been done, like I said, since May. So when the right tools are given to an organization, it's easy to make work happen. I think we should be really proud of it. On top of that, a new paved road on Brown Street, a non-motorized pathway along Brown Street leading to the Cascades, the connection of the Falling Waters Trail to the Cascades, and really bringing a focal point back to Jackson in the Sparks Foundation Cascades Park System. I think we should really be happy with what we've done here, and the partnership we've had with the city and the new tree plantings down there and everything else. So yeah, I think it's a real exciting project and something we can be proud of as a Board of Commissioners. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning those. There's so much going on there, and you captured a lot of the things that we've received in kind and in cash. So that concludes the items that I have for discussion on the agenda today, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Lechka.
I have an item I'd like to maybe bring up for discussion here, and then probably, hopefully, get it on one of the committee agendas. Several years ago, the county fair was asked, or county fair bought some property, the Blackstone property. It is county property. At that time, the fair manager felt that the fair needed to pay back the tax revolving fund where the money was borrowed from, because if it was not repaid, the county would be able to delve into the fair business more than that particular manager wanted to. So there was a liability set up due to the delinquent tax revolving fund. Money from the delinquent tax revolving fund in the past has been used to buy some county property, and no funds, no particular individual fund was asked to pay back the money to the delinquent tax revolving fund. And I guess I would just like to have this board consider removing the liability in the fair fund. It's about $160,000 yet, a little bit more. And all it is it doesn't affect the bottom line of the total county at all, because it's a liability in the fair fund and an asset in the delinquent tax revolving fund. So it would just be to remove the liability from the fair fund and the asset from the delinquent tax revolving fund. I think it's fair to have this done, because it's county property that's there. It's used for a county asset, and I guess if that could be added to the agenda for one of the committee meetings this week for discussion, I would appreciate that.
If I may, board policy requires us to send that to the administrator's office for review and them to report at the following month's meeting. So I guess it'll be on our January schedule of meetings. Is that all right, Dave?
That's fine.
Okay, then that's what we'll do. Everyone agree with that? By consensus? Okay. Commissioner Elwell.
Just two questions. Dave, has anything been paid back on it yet, do you know, or not? I didn't hear if you said.
Yes, it's the fair pays back, and I don't remember what the exact figure is. Every year we put it in the fair budget and pay it back. It seems like originally was like $300,000, and the fair's probably paid about half of it back.
And then my only other question is, when the property was bought, was the purchase based on a vote of the fair board, and I don't recall if our board.
The fair board, the fair manager decided that would be a good addition to the fair. She brought it to the fair board. The fair board approved it. Came to the county commission, and the county commission has to advance the funds, and it was done at that point.
So we actually approved the purchase then. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess on behalf for the administrator's office, so when we get this information, I would be curious to know then if any other parcels of property or loans have been taken out with that fund, the tax delinquent fund, in which they could also ask, are we setting a precedence? I realize we use it as an account, but are we setting a precedence by doing so?
To give the Board of Commissioners some history, when the Resource Recovery Facility was first shut down and then it was contracted out for operation by somebody else, there was a restart-up cost. And the revolving tax loan fund was used at that time to do that, and a considerable amount of money was borrowed from the revolving tax loan fund over the period of time. And I think Brad and I are probably the only ones that can keep track of this. Money was borrowed, interest was charged, the interest was zeroed out 1 year and left zeroed out for a number of years. The Board of Commissioners went back when the efficiencies and operations improved, and it started paying interest again. And one of the reasons why we really couldn't do anything with the incinerator until the bonds were retired was that revolving tax loan fund payback was also tied with it. So this has been done in the past by the Board of Commissioners. That's one historical item that I can think of for sure, and it was a considerable amount of money used. And I think we've used the revolving tax loan fund for other small purchases with payback. So yeah, so there's always been, and the Board of Commissioners have tweaked it the way the different agencies have been able to use the fund.
Okay.
According to their needs or tough financial times. So.
If I understand your question, you wanted to make sure there's not anything else out there from the revolving tax loan fund?
Correct, and setting a precedence and just in order of fairness. I understand the situation of the Fair Board, and it makes sense, but that's my bigger concern.
Okay, we'll make sure to look into that.
Second round of public comment. Seeing nor hearing none. Any other commissioner comments? Seeing nor hearing none, we're adjourned.